am sorry, my lady, but you are blocking the service entrance." The words came out softer than Iris intended, barely above a whisper, but Lady Vivian heard them clearly enough. The noblewoman turned, her emerald gown sweeping across the marble floor like a wave of liquid silk, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rising in an expression that managed to convey both amusement and disdain. "Blocking? How amusing. The help is complaining about being inconvenienced." Vivian's laugh was delicate, musical, the kind of sound that belonged in elegant ballrooms and sophisticated gatherings. Iris felt her cheeks burn as she clutched the heavy silver tray, laden with crystal goblets filled with wine. Her arms were beginning to shake from the weight, but she did not dare set it down. Not here. Not in the grand hall where the most important ceremony in a century was about to begin. "I apologize, my lady. I simply need to pass through to refill the northern tables before the ritual begins." Iris kept her eyes lowered, fixed on the intricate golden patterns woven into the hem of Vivian's gown. She had learned long ago that direct eye contact with nobility was considered impertinent, especially for someone like her. Especially today, when Lady Vivian was about to become the most powerful woman in the kingdom. The grand hall buzzed with anticipation, hundreds of voices blending into a symphony of excitement and speculation. Iris could feel the energy crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Every noble family in the kingdom had gathered for this moment, dressed in their finest silks and jewels, their faces glowing with the thrill of witnessing history. The great ritual of ligação only occurred once every 100 years, a sacred ceremony where the Alpha King would choose his eternal mate, binding himself to her through ancient magic that would intertwine their very souls. For the past 6 months, everyone had known who that chosen mate would be. Lady Vivian Rothschild, daughter of the Western Province's most influential family, educated in 7 languages, trained in diplomacy and warfare, beautiful beyond measure, and connected to every powerful pack in the kingdom. She was the obvious choice, the perfect choice, the only choice that made political sense. Iris had heard the whispers, had served countless dinners where nobles discussed the upcoming union with satisfaction and approval. This marriage would unite the northern and western territories, would strengthen trade routes, would create alliances that had been centuries in the making. It was a match designed by strategy, blessed by tradition, and anticipated by all. "Move along then, little mouse. Try not to spill anything on anyone important." Vivian waved her hand dismissively, finally stepping aside just enough for Iris to squeeze past. As Iris hurried through the narrow gap, she caught her reflection in one of the massive gilded mirrors that lined the hall. The contrast was almost painful. Where Vivian glowed with confidence and beauty, Iris saw a plain young woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing the simple gray uniform of palace servants, her face unremarkable, her presence forgettable. She was 23 years old and had worked in the palace for 3 years, and she could count on one hand the number of times anyone had actually looked at her, truly looked at her, as if she were a real person rather than a piece of mobile furniture. She was invisible, and she had made peace with that. Invisibility was safe. Invisibility meant survival. The northern section of the Grand Hall was already filling with guests, their excitement palpable as they claimed the best viewing positions for the ceremony. Iris moved efficiently between the tables, refilling goblets, replacing empty platters, making herself as unobtrusive as possible. She had perfected the art of being present but unseen, of anticipating needs before they were voiced, of moving through crowds like water flowing around stones. "Did you hear? The king arrived an hour ago and went straight to the preparation chambers without speaking to anyone." One noblewoman whispered to her companion as Iris refilled their wine. "They say he has not seen Lady Vivian in weeks," maintaining the tradition of separation before the bonding. The other woman sighed dreamily. How romantic. Imagine being chosen by him, by King Kale himself, the most powerful being in existence. Iris's hand trembled slightly as she poured, and a few drops of wine splashed onto the white tablecloth. She quickly dabbed at the stain with her serving cloth, hoping no one had noticed. But she had noticed. She always noticed when people spoke about him. King Kale, the Alpha King, the Eternal One, the Firstborn. He had so many names, so many titles, that sometimes Iris wondered if anyone actually knew who he really was beneath all the legends and myths. She had been working in the Yao Palace for 3 years, and she had seen him perhaps a dozen times, always from a distance, always while she was performing some menial task that kept her eyes focused downward. But she had felt him. Every single time he entered a room, the air itself seemed to change, to become heavier, charged with a power so ancient and profound that it made her bones ache with awareness. He was not like other alphas. The history books said he had existed for over 5,000 years, that he had been born, when magic still ran wild through the world, when creatures of legend walked openly under the sun. He was the first of his kind, a being so powerful that even other alphas lowered their eyes in his presence. He had built this kingdom from nothing, had united warring packs, had created laws and established peace through sheer force of will and unimaginable strength. And in all those thousands of years, he had never taken a mate, never bonded, never shown interest in such mortal concerns. Until now. 6 months ago, he had announced his intention to participate in the great ritual, to finally choose a queen to stand beside him. The entire kingdom had erupted in speculation and excitement. Noble families had paraded their daughters before him, had hosted elaborate gatherings in hopes of catching his attention. But Kale had made his preference clear through subtle gestures and calculated political moves. Lady Vivian had been invited to state dinners, had been seated at his right hand. During council meetings, had been given considerations and courtesies that signaled his intention as clearly as any formal announcement. It was settled. Everyone knew it. The ritual tonight was merely a formality, a beautiful tradition that would cement what had already been decided. Iris finished her rounds and slipped back toward the service corridors, hoping to find a quiet corner where she could wait until the ceremony concluded and the real work of the evening began. The feast after the bonding would require all hands, and she needed to conserve her energy. But as she reached the servants' entrance, she found her path blocked again, this time by Marcus, the head server, his weathered face creased with worry. "Iris, thank the goddess. I need you in the main hall. Helena called in sick, and we are short a server for the high table." Iris felt her stomach drop. The high table. "Marcus, I cannot. I am not trained for that. I will make a mistake." The high table was where the king and his chosen mate would sit after the bonding, where the most important nobles would gather, where every movement would be scrutinized and every error would be remembered. It was a position reserved for the most experienced servers, those who had trained for years to achieve the perfect balance of efficiency and invisibility. You are the only one available who is not already assigned. You will be fine. Just remember to serve from the left, clear from the right, keep the goblets full, and for the love of the moon goddess, do not make eye contact with anyone at that table. Marcus gripped her shoulder, his expression softening slightly. You are more capable than you give yourself credit for, girl. I have watched you work. You are careful, precise. You will do well. Before Iris could protest further, he pressed a new serving cloth into her hands and pointed her toward the main hall. Position yourself near the eastern pillar. When the ceremony concludes, the bonded pair will process to the high table. Be ready. Iris nodded mutely, her heart hammering against her ribs as she made her way back into the grand hall. The room had transformed in the brief time she had been gone. Thousands of candles now blazed in elaborate chandeliers overhead, their light catching on gold leaf and crystal until the entire space seemed to glow with warm, flickering radiance. The guests had arranged themselves in a massive circle around the center of the hall, leaving an open space where the ritual would take place. At the far end, On a raised dais sat an ancient stone altar that had been brought up from the ceremonial vaults deep beneath the palace. It was carved with symbols so old that no one living could read them all, and it radiated a power that made Iris's skin prickle with awareness, even from across the massive room. She found her position near the eastern pillar and tried to make herself small, just another shadow among the architectural features. From here, she had an unobstructed view of the altar and the gathered crowd. She could see Lady Vivienne standing in a place of honor near the front, her expression serene and confident, her hands clasped gracefully before her. The woman looked like she had been born for this moment, like she had been specifically designed by fate to stand beside a king. Around Vivienne, other noble ladies whispered and smiled, their faces showing varying degrees of envy and admiration. Iris wondered what that felt like, to be so certain of your place in the world, to know that you belonged somewhere, that you mattered to someone. She had never experienced anything close to that feeling. Her parents had died when she was young, lost to a rogue attack that decimated their small pack. She had bounced between distant relatives for years before finally aging out of their reluctant care and finding work at the palace. She had no pack, no family, no connections. She was alone in the world, and most days she barely felt real. She existed in the spaces between other people's lives, necessary but unnoticed, present but unimportant. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. A hush fell over the crowd as the great doors at the western end of the hall swung open. The royal guard entered first, 20 of the kingdom's most elite warriors in ceremonial armor that gleamed like starlight. They formed two lines, creating a path from the doors to the altar, and then they struck their spears against the marble floor in perfect unison, the sound echoing through the sudden silence like thunder. Then he appeared. King Cale stepped through the doorway, and Iris forgot how to breathe. She had seen him before, had glimpsed him from across rooms or through windows, but she had never been this close, had never had such an unobstructed view. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire hall, despite the hundreds of people packed into the space. His hair was dark, almost black, falling to his shoulders in thick waves that caught the candlelight. His features were sharp and aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but it was his eyes that made Iris's breath catch in her throat. They were silver, true silver, like molten moonlight, and they held an awareness, an intelligence, that spoke of countless centuries lived, countless battles fought, countless mysteries witnessed, and understood. He wore robes of deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that seemed to move and shift when the light hit them just right. Around his neck hung a single medallion, ancient and powerful, pulsing with a faint blue glow that matched the ceremonial magic beginning to gather around the altar. He moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so large, each step deliberate and controlled, each gesture carrying the weight of absolute authority. This was not simply a king. This was the being that other powerful creatures feared. This was the alpha of all alphas, the original, the one from whom all others descended. As Cale walked toward the altar, the crowd bowed, a wave of obeisance that rippled through the hall like wind through wheat. Even the most powerful nobles, the proudest alphas from distant territories, lowered their heads in deference and respect. Iris found herself bowing as well, her forehead nearly touching the pillar she stood beside, her whole body trembling with a sensation she could not name. It was not quite fear, though there was an element of that. It was more like standing at the edge of an ocean and suddenly understanding how vast and deep and unknowable it truly was. The high priest emerged from behind the altar, his white robes stark against the dark stone. He was ancient, one of the few beings in the kingdom old enough to remember the last great ritual, and his voice when he spoke carried clearly through the hall. Despite its softness, We gather tonight under the witnessing moon to observe a sacred covenant, a bond that will tie together not merely two souls, but the very fate of our kingdom. The great ritual of ligação has been performed only 49 times in recorded history. Tonight, we perform it for the 50th time. Tonight, our eternal king will choose his eternal queen. The priest raised his hands, and the air around the altar began to shimmer with visible magic, threads of silver and gold, light that wove together like living tapestries. King Kale, firstborn, alpha of alphas, guardian of the realm, step forward and declare your intention before the witnesses here gathered, and the ancient powers that govern all bonds between mates. Kale moved to stand directly before the altar, his expression unreadable, his silver eyes reflecting the magical light until they seemed to glow from within. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily through the vast space, without any need for amplification. I declare before all present and all powers that witness this moment that I claim my mate tonight. I bind myself to her through the ancient covenant, through blood and soul, through past and future, through all the magic that flows through this world and beyond it. I choose of my own free will, with full knowledge of the eternal nature of this bond. Once claimed, she will be mine until the stars cease to burn and the moon falls from the sky. Once claimed, I will be hers with equal totality and permanence. This is my solemn vow. The magic around the altar intensified, threads of light beginning to spiral outward, reaching toward the crowd like searching fingers. This was the moment. The priest would now call forth Lady Vivian, and the bonding would proceed according to tradition and expectation. Iris found her eyes drawn to Vivian, watching as the woman straightened her spine and prepared to step forward, her face radiant with triumph and anticipation. But the priest did not call Vivian's name. Instead, he simply gestured to Kyle and spoke words that had been repeated for thousands of years. Then seek her now, Ancient One. Follow the call of your soul to its destined match. The bond will guide you to the one the fates have prepared for you since the beginning of time. For a long moment, nothing happened. Kyle stood perfectly still, his eyes closed, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. The magical threads continued to spiral outward, weaving through the crowd, touching faces and hearts, searching for the resonance that would signal a true mate bond. Iris watched, fascinated despite herself, as one thread of golden light drifted past her hiding spot near the pillar. It was beautiful, warm, almost alive in the way it moved and pulsed. Without thinking, she reached out her hand, letting her fingers brush against the light. It felt like sunshine, like summer rain, like every good thing she had ever experienced condensed into pure sensation. The moment her skin made contact with the magical thread, everything changed. The light surged, blazing so bright that Iris had to close her eyes against the intensity. She heard gasps from the crowd, heard confused murmurs rising like a tide. When she opened her eyes again, every single thread of magical light in the entire hall had converged on her position. They wrapped around her like ribbons, like chains, like gentle hands, pulling her forward. And Kale's eyes were open now, locked directly on her with an intensity that made her knees buckle. He was staring at her, not near her, not past her, at her. Those ancient silver eyes were fixed on Iris like she was the only person in the entire hall, like she was the only person who had ever existed. Slowly, deliberately, he began to walk toward her. Not toward the center of the room where Vivian stood frozen in confusion. Not toward the noble section where the carefully selected candidates waited. Toward the eastern pillar, toward the servants' area, toward Iris. The crowd parted before him automatically, people stumbling over each other in their haste to move out of his path. Iris could hear voices rising in shock and disbelief, could see Lady Vivian's face draining of color, could sense the chaos beginning to ripple through the gathered nobles. But she could not move. She was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by those silver eyes that saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had before. Cale walked with absolute purpose, crossing the massive hall in what seemed like seconds, but must have been longer. He moved through the crowd like they did not exist, his focus never wavering from Iris's face. When he finally reached her, he stopped just inches away, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell cedar and winter wind, and something wild that made her wolf, her dormant, sleeping wolf that had never once stirred in all her 23 years, suddenly raise its head in awareness. You. His voice was soft, meant only for her ears, and it carried a weight of emotion that Iris could not begin to interpret. Wonder, relief, recognition, something that felt like greeting someone after a long absence, like finding something precious that had been lost for far too long. I have been waiting for you. Iris's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her mind could not process what was happening. This had to be a mistake. A terrible, impossible mistake. She was no one. She was nothing. She was invisible. The king's hand rose, and Iris flinched instinctively, expecting anger, expecting dismissal. But his fingers were gentle when they touched her face, tilting her chin up so their eyes met fully. His touch sent sparks of sensation racing across her skin, igniting nerve endings she had not known existed. Her wolf surged within her, pushing against barriers that had held it dormant for her entire life. Suddenly, desperate to emerge, to answer the call of its mate. "What is your name?" Cale asked, and there was something almost reverent in the way he spoke, as if her name was the most important information in the universe. Iris. My name is Iris, Your Majesty." Her voice came out as barely a whisper, shaking with confusion and fear, and a strange, overwhelming sensation that felt dangerously close to hope. Iris. He repeated her name like it was a prayer, like it was sacred. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Iris felt tears gathering in her eyes without understanding why. Do you feel it? Do you understand what is happening? She did not understand. She understood nothing. The world had turned upside down and inside out, and she was standing in the center of a catastrophe that she had somehow caused simply by existing. But she nodded anyway, because some part of her, some deep primal part that existed beyond reason and logic, did feel it. She felt the pull, the recognition, the sense that something broken had suddenly been made whole. Cale turned, keeping one hand on Iris's arm, as if afraid she might disappear if he released her. He faced the shocked, silent crowd with an expression of absolute certainty. I have found her. My mate. My queen. The one my soul has waited millennia to discover. The hall erupted. Voices rose in protest and confusion, in shock and denial. Iris could see Lady Vivienne's face contorted with rage and humiliation. She could see nobles conferring frantically with each other, could see the royal guard exchanging uncertain glances, unsure how to respond to a situation that had no precedent, no protocol. "This is impossible," someone shouted from the crowd. "She is a servant, a nobody. This cannot be the will of the fates." The magic does not lie. Cale's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, commanding instant silence. The great ritual has revealed its truth. Do you see the threads? Do you see where they have gathered? The ancient powers recognize what is before us all. This woman carries the mark of destiny. She is mine, and I am hers. This is not subject to debate or approval. The high priest had moved closer, his ancient eyes studying Iris with an intensity that made her want to hide. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of awe. "Your Majesty, if I may approach." Kyle nodded curtly, but he did not release Iris's arm. His grip was gentle but absolutely firm, possessive in a way that sent conflicting emotions, churning through her chest. The priest came to stand before Iris, peering at her face, then closing his eyes and placing one wrinkled hand against her forehead. Iris felt a surge of foreign magic, gentle but probing, searching through her as if reading the very structure of her being. The priest's eyes flew open, his expression transforming from skepticism to something approaching shock. Great goddess. She carries the mark, the original bloodline. I can feel it, dormant but present. His voice rose so the entire hall could hear. This woman is descended from the first pack, from the pure bloodline that existed before the Great Division. Her wolf sleeps, but it is there, ancient and powerful beyond measure. A new wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. The first pack was legend, a story told to children, a myth from the distant past. They were said to be the original wolves, blessed directly by the moon goddess, gifted with powers that modern packs could not even imagine. But they had been wiped out thousands of years ago in the Great War that had nearly destroyed the entire supernatural world. At least, that was what everyone believed. How is this possible? Lady Vivian's voice rang out, shrill with barely controlled fury. She is a common servant. If she carried such a bloodline, it would have manifested. Her wolf would have emerged. This is a deception, a trick of some kind. The priest shook his head slowly. The bloodline can lie dormant for generations, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken it. The presence of a true mate, especially one as powerful as His Majesty, would be more than sufficient to trigger that awakening. I can feel her wolf even now, beginning to stir, beginning to remember what it was meant to be. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. Kael's hand moved from Iris's arm to her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both possessive and protective. The ritual will continue. The bonding will proceed. Any who wish to object may do so now, and I will address their concerns. But understand this clearly. I have waited 5,000 years for this moment. I have ruled alone, fought alone, endured alone through centuries that would have driven lesser beings to madness. I will not be denied my mate, because she does not meet your political expectations or social standards. She is mine. The fates have declared it. The magic has confirmed it. That is the end of this discussion. His words left no room for argument, but Iris could see calculation in many of the noble faces, could sense that while no one dared object openly, this situation was far from resolved. Lady Vivian looked like she wanted to set the entire hall on fire. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her chest heaving with rage. Other nobles were whispering frantically to each other, no doubt already planning how to use this unexpected development to their advantage. But Kyle seemed to notice none of it. His attention had returned fully to Iris, his silver eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent, like he could see every thought, every fear, every secret she had ever hidden. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone despite the hundreds of people watching their every movement. Iris considered lying, considered denying the terror that was clawing its way up her throat. But something about those ancient eyes demanded honesty, and she found herself nodding. "Yes, Your Majesty. I am terrified. I do not understand what is happening. I do not understand why this is happening. I am no one. I am nothing special. There must be some mistake." A small, sad smile touched Kyle's lips. "You are not nothing, Iris. You have never been nothing. You have simply been unseen, unrecognized. But I see you. I have seen you since the day you first entered this palace, though you did not know it. I have watched you move through these halls like a ghost, invisible to those who should have valued you. And every time I saw you, I felt it. The pull, the connection. I did not understand it then. I thought perhaps it was simply curiosity, simply interest in a young woman who seemed to carry sadness like a cloak. But now I understand. My soul recognized you long before my mind could accept what that meant. Iris's breath caught. He had noticed her? For 3 years, she had assumed. Herself completely invisible to him, just another faceless servant among hundreds. But he was saying he had seen her, had watched her, had felt some connection even before this moment. It seemed impossible, but there was no deception in his eyes, no manipulation in his expression. "I do not know how to be what you need," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I do not know how to be a queen. I do not even know how to be a person who matters. You should choose Lady Vivian. She is perfect for you. She knows how to rule, how to navigate politics, how to be what this kingdom needs. I will only disappoint you." Kael's grip on her hand tightened, not painfully, but with firm insistence. "Vivian is what the kingdom expects. You are what my soul requires. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. I did not wait 5,000 years to settle for political convenience. I waited for you. For this. For the feeling that finally, after endless centuries of emptiness, I am home." The high priest cleared his throat gently, reminding them of the hundreds of witnesses still watching this exchange with rapt attention. "Your Majesty, if you wish to proceed with the bonding, we should do so now, while the ceremonial magic is still active. The ritual must be completed before the moon reaches its apex, or we will have to wait another 100 years. Kael nodded, but his eyes never left Iris's face. "Will you accept this bond, Iris? I will not force you. Despite what the magic says, despite what the fates have declared, you must choose this willingly. I need to hear you say it. I need to know that you want this, want me, even if you do not yet understand everything that choice means." Iris's mind was spinning, her thoughts a chaotic tangle of fear and wonder and disbelief. This was madness. This was impossible. Yesterday she had been invisible, and today the most powerful being in existence was asking her to bind her soul to his for eternity. Everything logical screamed at her to refuse, to run, to escape this situation that she was utterly unprepared to handle. But that small primal part of her, the part that had stirred when Kael first touched her, was singing. Her dormant wolf was pushing at the barriers that had held it caged for her entire life, desperate to answer the call of its mate, desperate to claim and be claimed. And beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, Iris realized she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt seen. Truly. Completely seen. Not as a servant, not as a convenient object, but as a person, as someone who mattered, as someone precious and important. Kael was looking at her like she was the center of the universe, like she was worth waiting millennia for, like she was everything. When had anyone ever looked at her like that? When had anyone ever made her feel like she was more than a shadow moving through other people's lives? "I do not know you," she said slowly, working through her thoughts as she spoke. "I do not know what being your mate means. I do not know if I can be what you need, but I feel it too. This pull, this connection. And she paused, gathering courage. "I do not want to be invisible anymore. I do not want to spend the rest of my life being nothing to no one. So yes, I accept. I choose this. I choose you." The words had barely left her lips when Kael pulled her against him, one arm wrapping around her waist, the other hand cupping the back of her head. His lips claimed hers in a kiss that sent shockwaves of sensation through her entire body. It was not gentle. It was possessive, claiming, a kiss that spoke of 5,000 years of waiting, of loneliness, of finally finding something precious beyond measure. And Iris, who had never been kissed, who had never been touched with anything approaching desire, found herself responding with an intensity that shocked her. Her hands fisted in his robes, pulling him closer, and her wolf surged within her. Finally breaking free of the barriers that had held it dormant. The transformation hit her like a physical blow. Power flooded through her veins, ancient and wild, and she gasped against Kale's mouth as her wolf emerged for the first time. It did not take physical form, not yet, but she could feel it fully present in her mind. A powerful, intelligent presence that had been waiting, sleeping, biding its time until the right moment. And it recognized Kale's wolf immediately. Recognized its mate with a certainty that transcended all doubt or logic. The magical threads around them blazed brighter, wrapping around both of them now, binding them together in spirals of gold and silver light. The high priest began chanting in a language so old that even Kale might not have remembered all its meanings, words of power that resonated through the hall and through Iris's very bones. She felt the bond forming, felt invisible chains of destiny and magic linking her soul to Kale's, felt the connection solidifying into something permanent and unbreakable. When Kale finally released her mouth, they were both breathing hard. His silver eyes had taken on a faint glow, and Iris realized with a start that her own eyes must be glowing too. She could feel the power running through her now, the heritage that had lain dormant finally awakening, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Mine," Kyle whispered against her lips, and his voice carried the resonance of his wolf. Deeper, more primal. "My mate, my queen, my Iris." "Yours," Iris heard herself respond, and the word felt like an oath, like a promise written into the very fabric of reality. The high priest's voice rose to a crescendo, and the magical light surrounding them suddenly burst outward in a wave of power that swept through the entire hall. Every person present felt it, the snap of the bond clicking into place, the finality of the connection being established. When the light faded, Iris was no longer wearing her simple gray servant's uniform. The ceremonial magic had transformed her clothing into robes similar to Kale's, midnight blue embroidered with silver, marking her as his equal, his mate, his chosen queen. Her hair had come loose from its practical bun, and now fell around her shoulders in dark waves that caught the candlelight. And most striking of all, her eyes, which had always been an ordinary brown, now held flecks of silver that matched Kale's perfectly, a physical sign of their bond, visible proof that the connection was real and complete. "It is done." The high priest's voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. "The bond is sealed. King Kale has chosen his mate, and the fates have blessed this union. I present to you Iris, Queen of the Realm, bonded mate of the Alpha King, bearer of the first blood." There was a moment of absolute silence. Then, slowly, uncertainly, people began to bow. They had no choice. The ritual was complete, the bond established. To reject it now would be to reject the sacred magic itself, to deny the will of the fates. Even Lady Vivian, her face pale with rage and humiliation, eventually lowered her head, though Iris could feel the hatred radiating from her like heat from a fire. Kale kept his arm around Iris's waist, supporting her as she swayed slightly. The transformation, the awakening of her wolf, the rush of ancient power through her system. It was overwhelming. She felt like a different person, like she had been asleep her entire life, and had only just now opened her eyes. "Steady," Kale murmured, his lips close to her ear. "The awakening is always intense. Breathe through it. Let your wolf settle. You are safe. I have you." His presence was anchoring her, his power providing a steady foundation against which she could brace herself. Slowly, the overwhelming rush of sensation began to ease, her wolf settling into a comfortable presence in her mind, no longer fighting for dominance but simply existing, aware and content. Iris managed to straighten, to stand on her own feet, though she was grateful for Cale's continued support. The high priest approached them, carrying a delicate silver crown that Iris had never seen before. It was ancient, clearly, with designs that matched the symbols on the altar, and it radiated a subtle power that made her newly awakened senses tingle with awareness. This crown has waited in the royal vaults for 5,000 years, the priest explained as he positioned it carefully on Iris's head. It was made for the first queen, the one who was prophesied to stand beside the eternal king when the time was right. Many believed it would never be worn, that the prophecy was metaphor rather than literal prediction. But here we stand, witnessing the fulfillment of ancient words spoken before most of our bloodlines existed. The crown settled onto Iris's head like it had been made specifically for her, and she felt another surge of power, different from her wolf's. Awakening. This was older, stranger, a magic that connected her to every queen who had ever ruled, every woman who had ever stood beside a powerful mate and helped guide a kingdom. It was not overwhelming like her wolf's emergence, but it was significant, meaningful. She was no longer just Iris the servant. She was Queen Iris, and that title carried weight and responsibility that made her knees weak. Cale seemed to sense her uncertainty. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. Gently, "You do not have to do this alone," he said quietly. "You will never have to do anything alone again. I will be beside you every step. We will learn this new life together." It was such a simple promise, but it meant everything. Iris nodded, blinking back tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. "I am scared," she admitted. "I know. So am I." His honesty surprised her. "You? You have ruled for 5,000 years. What could possibly scare you?" A small smile touched his lips. "I'm terrified of failing you, of not being what you need, of letting you down after you have chosen to trust me with your heart and soul. Power and age do not make those fears less real. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on." The vulnerability in his words, the raw honesty, did more to calm Iris's fears than any reassurance could have. He was not infallible. He was not beyond doubt or concern. He was simply a being who had waited a very long time to find her, and who wanted desperately not to mess this up. They were both frightened. They would both have to learn and grow, but they would do it together. Cale offered her his arm in a formal gesture. "Come, we must process to the high table. The ceremony is complete, and the feast awaits. I warn you, the next few hours will be exhausting. Every noble in the kingdom will want to meet you, to assess you, to determine how to approach you. They will smile while calculating how to use you, or undermine you. You must be strong." Iris took his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. "Then I will be strong. I have survived being invisible for 23 years. I think I can survive being too visible for one night." Kyle laughed, a genuine sound of amusement and affection. "There is that fire I sensed in you. Good. You will need it." They began to walk toward the high table, and the crowd parted before them like water. Iris could feel hundreds of eyes on her. Could sense the speculation, the jealousy, the calculation. But she kept her spine straight and her expression calm, channeling every lesson she had learned in her years of service. She knew how to read a room. She knew how to anticipate needs and navigate complex social situations. She had simply been doing it from the position of a servant rather than a queen. Perhaps those skills would translate. Perhaps her years of invisibility had taught her things that would serve her well now. As they approached the high table, Iris saw Marcus standing with the other servers, his weathered face split in a wide grin of genuine happiness. He caught her eye and mouthed the words, "I told you that you could do it." And despite everything, despite the terror and confusion and overwhelming changes, Iris felt herself smile. She had not done what Marcus expected, but she had done something. She had survived, She had chosen. She had stepped into a new life that terrified her, but also offered something she had never dared hope for. The possibility of mattering. The possibility of being loved. Cale helped her into the ornate chair at the center of the high table, then took his own seat beside her. Before them, the feast was laid out in staggering abundance. More food than Iris had seen in her entire life. Golden platters piled with roasted meats, crystal bowls filled with exotic fruits, delicate pastries arranged in elaborate towers, wines from every region of the kingdom. It was meant to celebrate a political alliance, but instead it would celebrate something far more profound. A bond that transcended politics, a connection that the fates themselves had designed. As the nobles began to approach the high table, offering congratulations and thinly veiled assessments, Iris felt Cale's hand find hers beneath the table. His fingers intertwined with hers, squeezing gently, a private gesture of support and solidarity. She squeezed back, and even though her future was uncertain and terrifying, even though she had no idea how to navigate the complex world she had suddenly been thrust into, she felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found where she belonged. The first noble to approach was an older woman with kind eyes and elaborately styled silver hair. She curtsied deeply, then smiled warmly at Iris. "Your Majesty, I am Duchess Helena of the Northern Territories. I wanted to welcome you properly and tell you that should you need any guidance in navigating court politics, I would be honored to assist. I remember well how overwhelming it can be to suddenly find yourself in a position of power." Her offer seemed genuine, without the calculating edge Iris had sensed from others. She inclined her head gratefully. "Thank you, Duchess. I may indeed seek your counsel. Everything is very new and rather frightening, if I am honest." Helena's smile widened. "Honesty is a rare quality in court, child. Guard it well, but also learn when to employ it strategically. Not all ears are friendly." It was good advice, delivered with kindness, and Iris filed it away carefully. As Helena moved on, others took her place. Some were genuinely welcoming. Others were clearly assessing her, looking for weaknesses or opportunities. And a few, like Lady Vivian when she finally approached, barely concealed their hostility. "Your Majesty." Vivian's curtsy was technically correct, but lacked any warmth. "How extraordinary this all is. I am certain none of us expected such an outcome tonight." Her words were polite, but her eyes were cold with fury. Iris met her gaze directly, remembering Cale's words about needing to be strong. "No, I imagine not. I certainly did not expect it. But the fates have their own plans, do they not? We can only accept what destiny places before us." It was a diplomatic answer, one that acknowledged the situation without gloating or apologizing. Vivian's jaw tightened, but she managed to maintain her polite facade. "Indeed. I do hope you prove worthy of the position you have so unexpectedly acquired. The kingdom needs a strong queen, not a frightened girl playing at royalty." Before Iris could respond, Kyle's voice cut in, low and dangerous. "Lady Vivian, you overstep. My mate's worthiness is not subject to your assessment or approval. You would do well to remember that." Vivian paled slightly but held her ground. "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no offense. Merely expressing my hopes for the kingdom's future." She curtsied again and retreated quickly, but Iris could see the calculation in her eyes, the determination. This woman would be a problem. She had been publicly humiliated, her expectations shattered, and she would want revenge. Cale's hand tightened on Iris's beneath the table. "She will try to undermine you. Vivian is not accustomed to losing, and she will see this as a personal failure that must be remedied. You must be cautious around her." Iris nodded slowly. "I understand. But Cale, I need to know something. Did you ever care for her?" Was there anything between you before tonight? It was a bold question, perhaps too bold, but Iris needed to understand what she was walking into. Cale turned to look at her fully, his silver eyes serious. No, there was never anything between us. Vivian was a political option, nothing more. I allowed the court to believe I favored her because it kept other ambitious families from pushing their daughters at me constantly. But I felt nothing for her, Iris. No connection, no attraction, no interest beyond the strategic value her family represented. You are the first person in 5,000 years who has made me feel anything real. The honesty in his voice was unmistakable, and Iris felt some of her tension ease. She believed him. The bond between them might be new and strange, but it did not allow for deception. She could sense his emotions now, could feel the truth of his words resonating through their connection. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Iris did her best to remember names and faces, to respond appropriately to the endless stream of nobles who wanted to assess the new queen. Some were genuinely kind, offering support and friendship. Others were clearly trying to establish alliances or gather information. And a few, like Vivian, were barely concealing their hostility and resentment. Through it all, Cale remained beside her, a steady, powerful presence that anchored her when the overwhelming nature of her new position threatened to swamp her. He would occasionally interject when someone became too forward or inappropriate, and his support gave her the courage to hold her own in conversations with people who had decades or even centuries of political experience. As the night wore on, Iris began to notice patterns. Certain families seemed aligned with each other, while others maintained careful distance. There were old rivalries and alliances that predated her involvement, complex webs of relationship and obligation that would take time to fully understand. But she was observant, had spent years watching interactions from the sidelines, and she filed away every detail for later consideration. Finally, as the moon reached its apex and began its descent toward the horizon, Cale leaned close and whispered, "We can leave soon. You have done magnificently, but I can feel your exhaustion. Through our bond, you need rest." Iris was indeed exhausted, both physically and emotionally drained. The awakening of her wolf, the bonding ceremony, the endless parade of nobles, it had all taken a toll. She nodded gratefully, and Cale rose, bringing the gathered nobles to immediate attention. "My queen and I will retire now. The celebration may continue, but we have fulfilled our ceremonial obligations for the evening." There were murmurs of understanding, and a few knowing looks that made Iris blush. Of course, people would assume they were retiring to consummate their bond, which was traditional after a mating ceremony. But when Cale helped her from her chair and led her away from the high table, he did not take her toward the royal bedchamber. Instead, he guided her through a side door and into a quiet corridor, away from the noise and chaos of the feast. "Where are we going?" Iris asked, her voice soft in the sudden quiet. "Somewhere private, somewhere we can actually talk." Without an audience of hundreds, he led her through several more corridors, each quieter and more isolated than the last, until finally he opened a door that revealed a beautiful garden terrace. It was clearly a private space, accessible only from the royal wing, with flowering plants arranged in elaborate patterns and a magnificent view of the grounds below. The moon hung overhead, nearly full, bathing everything in silver light. Cale guided her to a cushioned bench near the edge of the terrace and sat beside her, his arm sliding around her waist in a gesture that was becoming familiar and comforting. For a long moment, they simply sat together in silence, both processing the extraordinary events of the evening. Finally, Iris spoke. "This is real. This actually happened. I keep expecting to wake up in my servants' quarters and discover this was all some elaborate dream." Cale's fingers traced gentle patterns on her arm. "It is real. You are my mate, my queen, and I know you." Must have 1,000 questions, 1,000 doubts. Ask me anything, Iris. I will hide nothing from you. Iris took a deep breath, organizing her chaotic thoughts. The priest said I carry the blood of the first pack. What does that mean? I know the stories, but they are just myths, are they not? Tales told to children? Kyle shook his head slowly. No. The first pack was real. They were the original wolves, created when magic still ran wild through the world. They were powerful beyond imagination, each one capable of feats that modern wolves cannot even conceive of. They could heal mortal wounds, could communicate across vast distances, could manipulate the elements themselves. And they were beautiful, Iris. Not just physically, but spiritually. They represented the best of what we could be. His voice took on a note of sadness. But power attracts corruption. There was a war, a terrible conflict that nearly destroyed everything. The first pack was targeted because they represented a threat to those who sought to control the supernatural world. They were hunted, slaughtered, their bloodline nearly wiped out entirely. I was there. I fought beside them. I watched them die. Iris turned to look at him, seeing the ancient grief in his eyes. You knew them. You were there when it happened. I was young then, barely a century old, just beginning to understand the scope of my own power and the burden it carried. The first pack took me in, trained me, helped me understand what I could become. They were my family, Iris, and I failed to protect them. I survived, but they did not. Or so I believed. He paused, his hand finding hers again. But clearly someone survived. Somewhere, a member of the first pack escaped the slaughter and lived on in hiding, passing their bloodline down through generations until it reached you. That blood has been dormant in your family line, waiting for the right catalyst, the right moment to awaken. And tonight, when you touched the bonding magic, when you connected with me, it finally emerged. Iris processed this, her mind reeling. So, I am descended from these ancient wolves. That is why my wolf never emerged before. It was waiting. Exactly. Your wolf knew, even if you did not consciously understand, that it needed a mate of equal power to safely awaken. A normal alpha might have triggered a partial awakening, but it would have been incomplete, potentially dangerous. But me, he smiled slightly. I am old enough, powerful enough, that your wolf recognized it was safe to fully emerge, that it had found its match. What can I do? Iris asked, both excited and terrified by the possibilities. What powers do I have? Kale's expression grew thoughtful. That will take time to discover. Each member of the first pack had different gifts, different strengths. Your wolf will need training, guidance to unlock its full potential. But I can already sense tremendous power in you, Iris. You are far stronger than you realize. He turned to face her more fully. But power is not why I chose you. The bond, the connection we share, that transcends abilities or bloodlines. I chose you because my soul recognized yours. Because in 5,000 years, you are the first person who has made me feel alive, truly alive, rather than simply existing. Iris felt tears gathering in her eyes again. I do not know how to do this, how to be what you need, what the kingdom needs. You learn. We both learn, together. He cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. I am not expecting perfection, Iris. I am not expecting you to transform overnight into some idealized version of a queen. I simply want you. Your honesty, your kindness, your strength that you do not even recognize in yourself. That is enough. That is everything. When he kissed her this time, it was different from the claiming kiss at the altar. This was gentle, exploring, asking rather than demanding. Iris responded tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as her wolf purred its approval deep in her mind. She had never been kissed before tonight, had never been touched with desire, but her body seemed to know what to do, instinct guiding her as she pressed closer to Kale's warmth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale rested his forehead against hers. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. The court will be watching your every move, testing you, trying to find weaknesses to exploit. You will need your strength." Iris nodded, though part of her wanted to stay here forever, in this private garden where the world could not intrude. "Will I have my own chambers? Or—" She blushed, unsure how to phrase the question. Kyle's eyes warmed with understanding and a hint of amusement. "You will have your own chambers adjacent to mine, with a connecting door. You may use them whenever you wish for privacy or solitude. But I hope you will choose to sleep beside me, not because of obligation or duty, but because you want to, because you feel safe with me." "I do feel safe with you," Iris admitted. "That is the strange part. I should be terrified. You are the most powerful being in existence, and I am bound to you for eternity. But when I am near you, when you touch me, I feel safe in a way I never have before. Like I finally have someone who will protect me, who will not let me disappear into the shadows. You will never disappear again," Kale promised fiercely. "I will make certain the entire world sees you, recognizes your worth, understands that you are precious beyond measure. Anyone who tries to diminish you or harm you will answer to me, and I assure you, that is not a position anyone wants to find themselves in." His protectiveness should have been overwhelming, but instead Iris found it comforting. She had spent so long being invisible, being unprotected, that having someone willing to stand between her and the world felt like a gift rather than a constraint. Kale rose and offered her his hand. "Come, let me show you to our chambers. Tomorrow begins your training as queen, but tonight we rest." Iris took his hand and let him lead her back through the quiet corridors. They passed occasional servants who bowed deeply, their expressions ranging from curiosity to genuine warmth. Iris tried to smile at each one, remembering what it felt like to be in their position, to be invisible and unacknowledged. She would not forget where she came from. She would not let power make her cruel or dismissive. The royal chambers were beyond anything Iris had imagined. The main room was vast, with soaring ceilings and enormous windows that overlooked the moonlit grounds. Everything was elegantly appointed, but somehow still felt comfortable rather than cold or formal. Kale showed her the connecting door to her private chambers, a smaller but still luxurious suite with a massive bed, a private bathing room, and a sitting area with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "These are yours alone, your private space. No one may enter without your permission, not even me." Kale's expression was serious. "You need to know that you have autonomy, Iris. Our bond does not mean I own you or control you. You are my equal, my partner. Your choices, your privacy, your independence, all of that remains yours." Iris explored the room slowly, touching the soft fabrics, admiring the beautiful furniture, still unable to quite believe this was now her life. In the bathing room, she found that someone had already drawn a bath, the water steaming gently and scented with lavender and other herbs. "I will leave you to rest," Kale said from the doorway. "But if you need anything, I am just through that door. And Iris?" She turned to look at him. "Thank you for choosing me, for being brave enough to accept this bond even though it terrified you. I know I have given you no reason to trust me beyond what the fates decreed, but I promise I will spend every day proving myself worthy of the gift you have given me." Before Iris could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She stood alone in her new chambers, surrounded by luxury she had never dreamed of, wearing robes fit for a queen, with a crown on her head that represented ancient prophecy fulfilled. It should have felt like a dream. But when she reached up to touch the crown, It was solid and real beneath her fingers. Iris bathed quickly, washing away the physical remnants of the incredible day. When she finally climbed into the enormous bed, still wearing the beautiful nightgown she found laid out for her, she expected to lie awake for hours, her mind too full of thoughts and emotions to allow sleep. But the moment her head touched the pillow, exhaustion claimed her. Her last conscious thought was of silver eyes and a deep voice promising that she would never be invisible again. And for the first time in her life, Iris fell asleep feeling like she mattered, like she belonged somewhere, like she was home. Her dreams that night were filled with silver light in ancient forests, with a wolf running free under the moon, powerful and confident and finally awake. When morning came, her new life would truly begin. There would be challenges ahead, enemies to face, complex politics to navigate, and her own insecurities to overcome. But she would not face any of it alone. She had a mate who had waited 5,000 years to find her. She had power in her blood that was only beginning to awaken. And most importantly, she had finally found the strength to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved all of it. The sun rose over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and in the royal chambers, Queen Iris slept peacefully, dreaming of wolves and destiny and a future that was hers to claim. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming?